name is Ben Aylward, and I'm an administrator of an organisation called Nothing Fancy Spiritual Group. And our group sets out, I suppose, to promote and develop the work of spirit. And we serve churches and centres all over the peninsula, up from Cornwall through Devon and upwards. And here we run training courses here at Unity House, and we run an absent healing group that meets every Thursday evening. 60 people sit together in their own homes for 15 minutes, and we send healing to a list of people. And I met a woman, I was doing a demonstration on Monday night, and I met a woman who said to me that every name she's given me from our family have been cured in one way or another by the healing. So that's a lot of the work that we do. So if you wanted to look us up, we're on Facebook. My name is Ben Aylward. If you want to join with me, then I'll join you to the group if you want to get involved with healing or whatever. So welcome to you all this evening. What's going to happen is that we have a presentation by Jamie Aylward. Jamie Aylward, no relation to me, hasten to add, because lots of you have been asking. We're just friends. And I'm starting work at his church soon, doing demonstrations. So Jamie, welcome this evening to us. And Jamie runs the Exeter Spiritualist Centre in Exeter, and he's done extensive research on the proof of life after life. So he's going to talk for up to about an hour. There's going to be a film presentation, etc. We're going to have a break and have some sandwiches and tea, and then Paul Lashbrook, who is a spirit artist, and Paul is a very experienced spirit artist, and he will draw pictures of your loved ones, and he'll explain it himself, and obviously give you the clairvoyance and all the information as he's working. So we're in for a good evening. So welcome to you all. And if I could just ask you to close your eyes, and we'll say a very quick prayer. Father, Mother God, Divine Spirit, we welcome you here this evening into this room. And as you gather in around us, we thank you for the gifts that you bring with you for us to share. Fun and laughter as we work through this evening, and care and protection, and healing for everybody in this room and their families. But above all, we thank you for your divine love. And let that love build up inside us, so that everybody we meet from tomorrow onwards will be touched by its gains. We thank you also for the gift of our lives, for the love of our family and friends, and our animal companions, the beauty and the bounty of Mother Earth, and the challenges you send us, leading us ever onwards to the source of all that there is. If you would work with us this evening in helping us all to have a greater understanding of your work, dear Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Well, good evening and thank you for coming. Am I speaking loudly enough? Because I'm not really very used to it, public speaking. So, Sandy, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Jamie.
Great. Well, it's nice to have some friendly faces, and I'm sure the rest of you are friendly. I just know that. Now, I have done this talk before once, so I had to suddenly remember it all. So if I get the words in the wrong order, then you'll have to forgive me. Now, this didn't work the last time we did it, so it's not going to work this time. But hands up, who recognises who this is? Hey, one. Because I was expecting you to say who it was, or and then I was going to say, oh wow, this is Steve Jobs. Now does that ring a bell?
Yeah.
Co-founder of Apple. So responsible for the iPad and the iPhone in particular, and actually giving us a mobile internet. So we've got to say a big thank you to him for that. But he's in the spirit world now, and his last words were, "Oh wow, oh wow, oh wow." Clearly seeing something from, or somebody from the afterlife. And he's not the only famous person. I'm sorry you didn't recognise his face, but then that's too bad. Thomas Edison. Was another chap, you know who he is. I'm walking around, I'm going to trip over him. His last words were, "It's really lovely over there." Now, deathbed visions are just the start. There's a whole range of different phenomena which provide evidence of a continued existence. Now what we're looking for is the brain and consciousness being separate. So the you that's you, I want to be clear about a few of the things I'm saying. Consciousness, a bit difficult for me to spell, but it simply means the you that's you, the awareness that you have now. So if suddenly this room was wiped out by a nuclear bomb, you'd still there be for a moment or two, thinking and being exactly as you were before. So that's the awareness that I'm talking about. The brain acts like a filter. So in actual fact, the real you is much more than you're aware right now. You're being restricted by your brain. And you'll see a lot of the evidence I show in a moment backs that up. So what we got here, deathbed victims, deathbed coincidences. That's the sort of traditional grandfather clock stopping when the old man died. But mostly it's humans being alerted to the death of a loved one through some coincidence, and they're quite uncanny. Personal communication, well, that's obvious. I'll get onto that later. Past life memories, obviously where children will remember a past life, and is it real or not? Past life regression, near-death experiences. Recovery of lost consciousness, that's particularly interesting, although I'm not going to say much about it. That's where you have people, perhaps with meningitis, dementia, who have lost and long lost the ability to communicate. But just before death, or in rare cases, they will become suddenly totally lucid. So people can have a decent conversation with them. And why? Why? Because the brain is dying completely and it's breaking down. So the filter that is the brain is stopping working. And those cases are really exciting from that point of view. Historical literature. It's been written about, well, Plato was the first person to write about near-death experiences, but it's embedded in our language. I've seen the light at the end of the tunnel, jumping out of your skin. That particular last one, I've got a video at the end, by this guy called Tony Woody. His near-death experience literally was caused by that. They were a military plane landing. There was a problem. It had to land at 150 miles an hour, otherwise it would have caused itself damage with the weight. They ended up using 2 runways. Okay, worked that one out. It scared him witless, and he had a near-death experience. Anyway, serendipitous coincidences. Now, I'm not sure I'm going to have time to speak too much about this, but who knows they're being looked after? Do you know if you ask for help and look for the coincidences? There's a nod there.
Yes.
Another one there.
Yes.
Go on, hands up. Who's yeah. Oh, you know what I'm talking about. I'm speaking to a friendly audience. You know all this anyway. But I've had just a total run of them. I think the funniest one, I have to tell you this one. I chopped down some lilac trees by my house, I took a day off work, which was computer work. I'm not a particularly muscly guy, to dig out the stumps. And after 2 hours, I could barely lift a spade. So I let out this mental yelp to my late mother, saying, look, I need your help, but how? Because this is so physical. You know, and it was very comical. I went back to work on my computer. No kidding, 10 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Landscape gardener, do you need any heavy work doing? Lucid dreams. Okay, that's not scientific particularly, but I know for sure that I've had genuine communication through a dream. And I would not be here had I not acted on some primary information that I had. So some dreams are real, but that's all I'm going to say about that. Mediumship, well, you're here, you know about mediumship. We're going to get a demonstration later of spirit art with Paul Ashbrook, so that'd be great. The consistency of all these things. You know, if the brain created consciousness, then all this would be ridiculous. But if we are, as probably most of you know, spirits with having a human experience, then everything falls into place. All these bits and pieces, jigsaw puzzles are the same thing. It works brilliantly. Can I just ask, how many of you know there's a continued existence? That's pretty good. How many are total skeptics? And you can be honest, it's okay, it's fine. Oh, you're a total skeptic. Thank you. Great. Well, I'll ask you at the end where you see if you can change your mind. And the others are just generally, you believe it, you think it might be the case. Yeah? Okay, well, let's carry on. Deathbed visions, these are usually moments of great joy, exciting reunions, a sudden realization that life really does continue. And clearly Steve Jobs was experiencing just that when he said, oh wow, oh wow, oh wow. They usually happen in the last 24 hours of life. 70%, this is research saying this, involve some sort of collection by a relative, a deceased relative that they know. I was lucky enough, certainly in retrospect, to witness my own mum having a deathbed vision. What was fascinating was that actually the barriers between this world and the next broke down, or started to break down about 2 weeks before she died. So she started seeing things. On the night before she died, which was Christmas Eve, she saw a deceased friend of hers who actually was a medium in life, but that's irrelevant. Then she saw this image of Santa Claus. On my way out, she said to get out of the way of the nurses, and I looked behind me. I don't doubt that she saw real nurses, they just weren't physical nurses. And that gave me a warm glow, because I knew they were there. I didn't sense it, I believed her. And she died on Christmas Day. So the Santa Claus, that's significant. And the other thing is that blind people have them. And that might be a surprise, but it shouldn't be, because what you see isn't the direct input from your eyes. The optical nerve does not feed directly into the visual cortex, but another area. And this is quite interesting because it possibly gives an explanation of how mediums might actually see things. Just for fun, I'm just going to show you that. Now, you're hallucinating now, as in hallucinations don't represent reality. Hands up who thinks that square A and square B is the same colour. What? No, that's right. No, yeah, that's what. You think they're different colours, don't you? Well, I promise you they're the same colour. Okay? So your mind is playing, well, not mind is playing tricks on you, but it's a hallucination. So just bear that in mind. I don't know whether I could demonstrate, but basically, if you were to do that, does that look any different? Can you see the same?
Yeah.
So there's more to the brain than you think. Anyway, that was just an aside. So research has done, lots of research has been done on this. So between 1959 and 1973, some research was done of tens of thousands of individuals by guys called Carlis Otis and Erland Haraldson. Now, they found that 50% of the people that they investigated had deathbed visions. In 2010, this lady called April Masserino Willett did similar research and estimated that 50 to 60% of us are likely to get experience deathbed visions. Now, science likes patterns, and repeatable things. That's different researchers, it's a different century, but similar results. If you think that 500,000 people in the UK die every year, 50% of them have deathbed visions. It's all hushed up. It's almost like a conspiracy theory. Okay? We don't talk about it, and we need to. Oh, I haven't finished one yet. Or have I finished on deathbed visions? I think I have. I have anyway. Deathbed coincidences. So this guy, Peter Fenwick, he's a neuropsychologist and a researcher. So he's classically trained, but then through his own interest started doing some research. And researching these coincidences, someone being alerted to somebody's death. And this is what he says, and then you can read that. But many different areas of a person's life seem to be interconnected at the time of death. Occasionally their animals behave strangely. Their clocks may stop, bells may ring, lights may switch on or off. All these aspects of the dying process fit neatly into a theory of consciousness in which the universe is highly interconnected and has love and light at its very core. They fit poorly with the current neuroscience idea that consciousness is generated by the brain and remains local to the brain. And he quotes a couple of cases. This Julie Salmon woke at 2 o'clock in the morning shouting, "Mum!" She instantly knew that her mother had died. because it was 2 o'clock in the morning, she didn't ring the hospital, but they rang her at 7:30 in the morning to say that she had indeed died. It's particularly convincing where the death is unexpected. So this lady called Elizabeth Daniel woke at 4:15 one morning to the sound of her ex-husband's voice saying, we don't need to talk anymore. And she divorced this man 28 years before that, so there's no communication. So it took her a few days to find out that actually her husband had died that night. So it's the uncanny timings plus the evidence that constitutes the evidence for this. And there are thousands of cases like this. I'm going to have to brush past them, but there's just so many other things. Now this is really quite comforting, okay? Because again, most of the research is done in America, but an national opinion poll, again, it's fairly old, 1972. 1,500 Americans showed that 27% of them had had experienced some sort of personal communication with somebody who passed on. A similar study in Iceland produced 31%. Dewey Reeves, who's a Welsh GP, found that 50% of the 66 widowers that he interviewed had some sort of direct communication with their dead spouse. So some had appeared to them, some had they heard their voice, and others they could smell, but of course that might, I'm sure they knew their perfume. My brother-in-law was lucky enough to see my late wife when she died, because he was distraught, as you might imagine. And so she was trying to say, look, I'm fine. And so he actually saw her, which was great. Now, I was lucky enough as well to communicate months later in a different way. And to me, this was fascinating, because it wasn't the communication itself which was so significant, but the way it happened. Because this idea of consciousness and the brain being separate, this communication really did happen that quickly. And in that second, I have to say I was falling asleep at night, okay? So I wasn't asleep, but my brain was shutting down. And that's the significance here, because in that split second, I knew instantly, no shadow of doubt, total recognition of who it was. And boom, my thought had gone. I haven't filtered it. Because normally you put things, you edit it, don't you? You say, well, how's the best way to put this? But no, boom. And then I thought, oh, my thought's gone. And this is saying exactly what all these things are saying. Consciousness and the brain are separate. Hands up, who's got children? Okay, no, go, keep, I can see, put your hands down. Okay. So, all right, what I'm trying to say is, hands up then, who thinks their children were born without, as a blank sheet, without any character or little personalities? So you all think they came with little personalities. Where did it come from? Okay, and this is great, because I think you're right. That's an American Corsair aircraft. This little boy called James Aylward, when he was 2 years old, would bash his little toy plane into furniture, saying, "Plane's in flames, little man can't get out." He also had nightmares and thrash about, which concerned his parents. But it came out that he said his former name was James. He was a pilot on board the Natoma aircraft carrier, and he was shot down. His plane was hit on the engine. He also described these planes as tending to turn to the left, and would frequently get flat tyres. He also had three G.I. Joe dolls called Leon, Billy and Walter. So his father did some investigation, and he found there was a James Houston stationed aboard a Natoma Bay aircraft carrier in the battle for Iwo Jima in Japan. I didn't tell you that James Aylward said his best friend was Jack Larson, and he happened to fly with this James Houston. Also, there were Billy, Walter and Leon as part of the crew. And and they said yes, that he even traced eyewitnesses, and the eyewitnesses said the plane was hit on the engine, and they didn't see him eject. So where did all that come from? Don't you love it when a plan goes wrong? Helen Wambach wanted to disprove this past life memory business. So beginning in the mid-60s, she did past life recalls of just over 1,000 people. Being a scientist, she wanted things she should verify. So she asked very specific questions about basic information, like utilities, housing, clothing, things that could be verified. And she found the results were amazingly accurate. And her statement was, fantasy and genetic memory could not account for the patterns that emerged in the results. I don't believe in reincarnation, I know it. Dr. Even Stevenson is a gift for people looking for hard scientific evidence. He was a real stickler for detail. He'd throw out anything where there was a remote possibility that the child could have learnt through some other means, or he wouldn't take hypnotic regression because that could later be argued as ideas being implanted. So basically a case would be solved for him when he'd found the life of that the child was describing and verified beyond any shadow of a doubt that by no even improbable means, there's no way the child could have learned that. He spent 40 years of his life doing this, and who were he and his colleagues. So they had 2,600 cases or so, and 895 verified beyond any shadow of a doubt. A couple of examples. This Swanlata Mishra said her form of personality was called Bia Patak. She had 2 sons. She was able to describe the house inside and out, its location, the proximity of lime furnaces nearby, a girls' school behind the house. And when she was introduced to the family, I think she was about 10 at the time, she acted bashfully around her former husband, lowering her eyes as apparently wounded wives did or do. She identified her son Merle, even though he was trying to deceive us, saying that he wasn't called Merle. She also identified 24 people that she'd named and identified. I mean, if you actually look at this, I'm just skimming over all the detail, really. There's so much detail in this case. She even told her husband that he'd stolen 1,200 rupees from her and hid the money in a box. And unsurprisingly, she didn't know anything about the family after she died, because if she reincarnated very quickly, she wouldn't, even from the spirit world, she wouldn't have known. Stevenson also found that 35% of these cases were born with some sort of birthmark or defect that corresponded with the wound that killed them. This isn't the musician Ravi Shankar. I don't know. There is a musician. Some people know him. I don't. But this little boy was born with a birthmark that resembled a slit across his throat. Again, when he was 2, he told his parents his name was Munna, or his former name was Munna, that he'd been abducted away from his toys, because he wanted his toys back. He told me exactly where his body was buried, all the details about the murder. He identified, it was a washerman and a barber that did it, or he said. It led to their arrest, but there wasn't enough evidence to convict them, unfortunately. But even told them the fact that only his former parents could possibly have known that he'd eaten guavas on the morning of his death. So it's really detailed stuff. Now, this isn't Ravi Shankar, but I don't know whether you can see the mark that looks a bit like a knife slit there. This is another one. So this is the coroner's sketch of the injury that this person was describing. And if you can see there was a shotgun. You can see the splatter marks there because shotguns splatter. And it's anyway, that's there. I think quite finished with that other slide, but the fact that these regression, the past life memories happen, just shows that the people who do regress people have got a good reason for doing it. They all interlink. Each one proves the other. Brian Weiss is an American psychologist. Now he's famous for his book Many Lives, Many Masters, which is a really interesting book if you're into hypnotherapy. You're really
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah, great. Well, this lady called, for the purpose of the book, he called her Catherine. She'd been through traditional psychotherapy for years without any effect at all, so he thought he'd try regression. Now, he didn't believe in past lives, he was a total skeptic and that sort of thing. But he quickly found that when he regressed her to the cause of a particular problem, she was talking about a different life. And subsequent sessions revealed other lives. And then in between times, there were some messages from the spirit world to help Brian Weiss. So both of them had their lives massively improved by this. And one of the details that came, this by the way is Arnold Bloxham. I could have possibly started with him because has somebody seen the block or heard the Bloxham tapes? Yeah. So that's Arnold Bloxham. So he was a hypnotherapist. He regressed 400 people and found similar things. It's the minutiae. When you regress somebody like that to a particular age, they take on the knowledge of the little stuff that they couldn't possibly have known or guessed. Brian Weiss was quite brave because the problem with any scientist publishing their results is they risk their careers. But he published his book, and instead of being ostracised, he got telephone calls and letters from his colleagues saying, "Yes, I found the same," but they weren't brave enough to admit it. Right, this is what I really want to talk about because these are wonderful. The others prove or show evidence for a continued existence, but there's way more than that. I presume everybody knows roughly what a near-death experience is because it's been. No. Well, great. No, well, that's love because I was going to tell you anyway. But, so a classic one. Now, they're all different, okay, and not everybody experiences the same as a classic one. But a classic, fully blown near-death experience will involve some sort of thing like a car accident, any incident to cause the death, and then perhaps they might go out of their body and see exactly what's going on. They might have an expanded awareness. They might have a sudden knowledge of everything and understanding everything. They might meet a deceased relative to help them. And they might go through a tunnel. They might meet a barrier which they know if they go beyond they can't return. Then they might meet a being of light. And they might have a life review. And in the life review, there's no judgment, but they see everything, every thought, and every action, and it happens so quickly, yet they also have time to ponder on each thought and action if they need to. But they also experience it from the other person's point of view. So if they've hurt somebody, they will feel that pain. And they understand the moral implication. But no judgment, just, oh, okay, I could have done that better. And I'll get on to more of that later, but you get some of these comments. So imagine, for example, you're trying to help somebody who's lost a partner, or it doesn't matter who, and who believes in annihilation, there's nothing afterwards, and they believe they've lost them totally. And then you tell them that the experience that these people have, this one, it was simply the most amazing, beautiful thing I have ever experienced. That's a very powerful thing to say. And I love this one. Oh, I'm dead. How lovely. It was Raymond Moody who coined the phrase near-death experience in his work. He published, he got 130 cases that he analysed, and he found 12 or 15 different things common to all these NDEs. So some things were already mentioned, like the barrier, like the being of light. Not all NDEs had all of them, but all of them had some of them. Curiously, when I did the talk before, I asked this question and got an awful lot of responses. How many people here have experienced themselves, have witnessed themselves
from out of the body? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 out of 30-ish. I haven't counted. But you know, I don't know whether that helps you to show how real it is. These people have experienced it. So where am I? Yes, so he published this book, Life After Life, and it was a bestseller, and it got people on the bandwagon, at least researching it. So he sparked a plethora of research. Kenneth Ring, who you'll see later, you don't really need to know a list of them, it's meaningless, but a whole load of people. An opinion poll was done in 1990, no, it wasn't opinion, it was a Gallup poll in 1992 of America, in America. And they estimated that 13 million Americans had near-death experiences. Now, if you look at that's 4% of the population. What's 4% of 30? But we've got more than 4% of 30, all right? So it's a believable thing. And a similar survey in Germany was done, getting 4% of the population. And it sparked lots of things. So a group of them set up this International Association of Near-Death Studies, that's that one. They fund research now into near-death experiences, and they have a journal of near-death experiences which is published quarterly. Then Geoffrey Long, that's Geoffrey Long, I think, separately did this research foundation, the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation. So that's an online thing, but he's now collected over 4,000 cases. Okay, now, when he did his research, he had about 1,300 cases he analysed, and he said the evidence is in the detail. So if they were all saying different things, they think, well, there's no pattern there. But they don't. They all say different things. Blind people have them. People have them when they've had anaesthetics. Anaesthetics are designed to cut out consciousness, and I'm very grateful for that because it's very nice, isn't it, when you need it. So the evidence is in the patterns, and these are all the same. Because the other thing is that the evidence here is totally contrary to Western thinking. Because what we've got here is a phenomenon that's been written about since Plato, 400 BC, and instills beneficial and profound changes in those people who experience them personally or vicariously through others. We'll get onto that a bit later. And it's the same regardless of religion. Religion has nothing to do with it. The NDEs of children who could possibly have found out about NDEs through any other means say the same thing. They're very, very powerful. I'm going to show you, I don't know what time, anyway. Sampanya, now, skeptics, you see, say all this stuff is anecdotal, so Geoffrey Long stuff, it was written by people putting in their memories or whatever, and there's no way you can scientifically analyse them. So Sampanya tried to address that. There was this AWARE project that his researchers published in 2014. So across different countries, so America, Austria and the UK, they rigged cardiac theatres, or operating theatres, to clinically study cardiac arrests. Okay, so out of 2,060 cardiac arrests, 330 survivors, 101 interviewed. 22% had a feeling of peace. Who's had a general anaesthetic here? Yeah. Can you remember anything, or was that when you had your NDE?
No, it wasn't. No, I don't remember anything when I was on.
No, you don't, do you? I don't remember it. But 22%. Okay, so 13% reported senses more vivid than normal. Again, their brains shut down. Within seconds of the heart stopping, the brain shuts down. And again, senses more vivid than normal. There can't be hallucinations, because hallucinations create electrical activity, and most of these people are wired to monitors. And hallucinations don't actually represent reality. There's a couple of very funny cases. So Lloyd Rudy's case wasn't particularly funny, but it was curious because of his post-it notes.
because this was a little while, the technology was old, well, it goes back a while, but basically they had this operation, this guy, it was a standard sort of operation, but they did have to put him on some sort of life support. And at the end of the life support, at least at the end of the operation, they couldn't get him off the life support. No matter what they did, they couldn't get him off. And they had to just give up. And apparently the machine was spewing out paper, the heart monitor, and they just left it running. 18 minutes, it was like that. The anaesthetist, who hadn't eaten all day, had gone to the cafe to get something to eat. And then it started, they only sewed him up because there's going to be a post-mortem, so they put a few stitches in, nothing proper. And then this heart monitor started going again. And this guy, afterwards, the patient described all this pandemonium, the shout for the anaesthetist. He also described these post-it notes. Well, the post-it notes were actually telephone messages for the surgeon that came in during the operation. So they weren't even there to start the operation. So all these details are... a surgeon's got to be really careful, because there was one surgeon that was reprimanded by his patient, saying, "Why are you clucking like a chicken?" His excuse was he had to admit what he'd done. He said, "Well, I'm very sorry, but I had to hand over the operation to a junior, and I wanted to keep my hands sterile." So he placed them against his chest because the cloak would have been sterile, and he said he was giving instructions with his elbows. He probably had chicken for supper that night, but it just shows they've got to be very, very careful. But back to this again. They're reporting says 46% record awareness while their brain is dead, essentially. You know, and these are clinical, these are scientific. It's a progressive study, which means they're studying things while it's happening. And the rest of these things, these are Raymond Moody's criteria. Came to a border of no return, visual awareness, encountered a mystical being. So this clinical research just backs up everything that Raymond Moody said to begin with. And this is an old one. Okay, this is Admiral Francis Beaufort in 1849, who nearly drowned in Portsmouth Harbour. From the moment that all exertion had ceased, a calm feeling of the most perfect tranquility superseded the previous tumultuous sensations. So he's feeling calm, even though he's drowning or just drowned. Though the senses were deadened, not so the mind. Its activity seemed to be invigorated in a ratio which defies all description. He's more alert than normal. This is what Raymond Moody's saying. This was well before Raymond Moody. The whole period of my existence seemed to be placed before me in a kind of panoramic review, and each act of it seemed to be accompanied by a consciousness of right or wrong. It's a life review. It's Raymond Moody stuff all over again. Penny Sartori. She's a nurse, or was a nurse, and she was inspired to do a PhD in near-death experiences. Took her 8 years of research. She was inspired. There's one particular patient. She said she had this silent communication with him. Basically, he was wanting to die, and she was trying to keep him alive, and it was just let me die. And then all the near-death experiences that she did deal with. So after 8 years of research, because if you're trying to take an educated opinion, does this happen or does it not? Who do you ask? Do you ask some skeptic, or do you ask somebody who's just devoted 8 years of their life to it? Okay, so the crucial point I want to make, she said, is that NDEs undoubtedly occur and have very real, life-changing effects on those who have them. Further to that, the wisdom gained during the NDE can be life-enhancing and have hugely positive effects on those who have not experienced an NDE. All we have to do is to take notice and hear what these people have to say. And then she says, the biggest thing I've learned since undertaking my research is not about death, but about life. With our current technology and consumerist, materialistic way of life, we have forgotten the most important thing: how to live. Roger Ben, she had a clothes shop. I think she may still, I don't know how old this is, she may still have a clothes shop. She went in for some operation, it went wrong, she had an NDE, she came back with a detailed knowledge of quantum physics. She then, you said you were interested about quantum physics, she then enrolled in this, in France, she enrolled in this university course, and the professor was totally staggered. There were some things in what she was saying that he didn't know or didn't understand, and he said there's no way that this lady could have gained this information quickly through normal means. I need to more, Johnny. Now, time is running on, so the video I've got is actually 18 minutes long, so I think I might skip that one. But it's well worth looking on YouTube, because the point is when you see the videos and you talk to somebody, I mean, I know 10 people now that have near-death experiences, they keep it quiet. They keep it quiet because, first of all, they don't think anybody will believe them. But secondly, sometimes they cannot describe it, they cannot put it into words. It's more than we can understand. But essentially, she had Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is a form of cancer. And she decided against going for chemotherapy. She was taken into this hospital for palliative care, final few hours of life, basically. She was in a coma, and the doctor gave her, when you've got a lymphoma, what happens, your lungs fill up with liquid. So one of the operations they do is just to relieve the drain the lungs, basically. So that's what happened to her. And she passed over, and she met her father, who said, "It's not your time yet." And she weighed up the pros and cons, because she really wanted to stay, but after a while it was shown to her that the benefits if she came back, and she decided to come back. Meanwhile, she witnessed her brother get on a plane. This was in Hong Kong, where this was all happening. She witnessed a plane coming from India, because she was really wanting to be there for her brother to come back, or to be there when she died. But then she made this decision to stay. She also witnessed the doctor telling her husband she's only got hours to live. And anyway, she came back and woke up and he said, "Hello, Dr. Kang, how are you?" And he said, "Well, how do you know my name?" "Until you're the one that drained my lungs." And her husband was surprised at this. "Well, how did you know his name?" "Well, he was the one that told you I'd got hours to live." And so that was down the corridor, 40 yards down the corridor. You know, if you look on the web, you'll see her medical reports. They're all there. So that really is. Oh, the other thing about this is that the cancer was gone within 2 weeks. That is staggering. Hodgkin's lymphoma is you get all these lumps all over the place. It's what killed my wife, and it was 4 years for my wife. Now, to think of her recovering from that in 2 weeks, it's just not going to happen. So something very special happened there. Now, if you think about that, she made the decision to come back. That was a mental decision. I'm going to come back, and then everything else fell into place, and the illness went. Sean Madden. This is actually a friend of mine. I go to Spanish. Met him at Spanish, known him for a couple of years before he even mentioned it. When he was 17, he went for a run in the back streets of Ottery, area where I live. And there were cars coming, it was dark, and he thought he'd get out of the way of the cars. He went over this barbed wire fence and slit his wrist all the way up to his elbow. And as you can imagine, that did the trick. Now, then he said he met, he was out of his body, saw these beautiful beings and met an orchard, or went to saw an orchard. And as he approached the orchard, there was a stream. And he said he knew, as if being told, that if he were to cross the stream, he wouldn't be able to come back. One of Raymond Moody's things, if you remember. He didn't like his life at the time, and he fought fiercely to try and get across the stream, but he found he couldn't. And then he met a being of light. I'm going to try and remember, because I didn't actually write it on there, what he said. Because something like, Imagine her being a pure light, thousands of times brighter than the sun, whose countenance is pure love. And once surrounded by this being's light and love, you become part of this being, eternally and irrevocably united in some way with this light. Imagine a being whose sole concern is for your welfare and your every need, who will wipe every tear from your eye. Imagine a being of infinite majesty, yet humble enough to entertain your presence and sincerely care for you as no human could. It's hardly surprising that they don't want to come back. And at the end, this guy, Tony Woody, vocalised it in a different way. He said, imagine receiving the love from all the mothers that have ever lived all at once. He said, don't come close. Now, reading about these near-death experiences, you begin to feel these things. But Sean went on. He was brought up Catholic. He said, this being surrounded me and started to talk to me. He was alive. I started saying things about prayers to St. Augustine, but it said it wasn't interested. It didn't want to know how many Hail Marys I said, but only how much love was there in my heart. How was my spiritual journey on earth? And that rather says it all about what this life is about. He also went on to say that this idea of separateness is an illusion. There is only one being. We are all connected. And that's a recurrent theme in lots of things. So people are changed. When they have a fully blown NDE, particularly the life review, they come back and they have a zest for life, they do more for charity, they want to learn things. It's the little things that they like. Oh, and something like that, I forget the percentage, because either 40 or 80% can no longer wear watches because they won't keep good time. And they're more psychic, so things have changed. But it's the researchers that have changed which is so fascinating, because people like Kenneth Ring. Well, there's so many researchers, traditional medics, who've been trained that consciousness is a part of the brain. They come back and they change their lives. Pim van Lommel was a Dutch cardiologist. He started asking his patients, had they had NDEs? And they had. So he investigated them. He gave up his work, he researches and he gives talks on that. Penny Sartori changed her life over it. Kenneth Ring did. That's just a quote by Einstein. So Einstein clearly knew about it. A human being is part of the whole called by us universe. So we're part of the universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feeling, as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. So Einstein knew about that. Now before I go on to the next bit, what I want to do, if I can find my mouse, is to show you a quick video by Kenneth Ring, because this gives you an idea of why people are changed. I can't see. I'll lose my mouse on. You can do it. Doesn't want to do it, does it? Let's go for it. Next one. Right, now we're going to enlarge it. Give Give me a second to turn the volume
remarkable
up.
aspects of the near-death experience, and it's one that's not really given the amount of attention that it should. Obviously, many people know about the light, they know about the out-of-body experience, but the thing that really is, I think, important about the near-death experience, and in regard to the life review phenomenon, is it isn't just a life review. It's a reliving of your life. And when people describe this, it's not always done in this way, but when people describe the full experience, it's every single act that you have done, every single thought that you have thought, every single word that you have spoken. Suddenly, all of this is back with you. You are running through it again, and as you say, you see and you experience the effects of these acts, these thoughts, and these words on other people. Let me just give you one brief example to illustrate this. I have a friend who, when growing up, was kind of a roughneck. He had a hot temper, and he was always getting into scrapes. And one day, he was driving in his truck through the suburb of the town where he lived, and he almost hit a pedestrian. And he got very aggravated at this pedestrian, and he was a very big physical guy, still is. And a fight ensued, and he punched this guy out and left him unconscious on the pavement, got back into his truck and roared off. 15 years later, this guy has a near-death experience. Oddly enough, it was caused by an accident in regard to his own truck at that time. But in any event, he has a near-death experience, and during the near-death experience, he has a life review. And in his life review, this particular scene of the fight takes place again, comes up in his life review. And he said that, as many people do, he kind of experienced this from a dual aspect. There was a part of him that was almost as if he were high up in a building, looking through a window and seeing the fight below. But at the same time he was observing the fight like a spectator, he found himself in the fight, except this time he found himself in the role of the other person. And he felt all 32 blows that he had rained on this person originally 15 years ago, now being inflicted upon himself. He felt his teeth cracking, he felt the blood in his teeth, he felt everything that this other person must have felt at that particular time. It was a complete role reversal, an empathic life review experience. And this is the sort of thing that many people report. And when they report these kinds of experiences, they realize that in our life, we are the very people that we hurt, we are the very people that we help to feel good. And we experience these actions as though done to ourselves in the life review. So that when people start talking about the golden rule in the context of the near-death experience, the golden rule is not just a precept for moral conduct, it's the way it works. And you experience this during the life review. And you learn that lesson in a very forcible way as a result of going through this kind of experience. And that's why when people have NDEs, they change as much as they do. Because if you can even imagine what it must be like to go through your entire life and see everything that you've ever done without judgment, but from a kind of almost omniscient point of view with regard to the effects of those actions, and see what your actions do to other people, it's a heavy kind of lesson, and it's something that stays with you, and it informs your conduct for the time after your near-death experience. So it does give us a lot to think about, and that's why I say in my book, Lessons from the Light, the near-death experience isn't given just to those who have the experience, it's given to all of us to learn from, because all of us can profit by the lessons that near-death experiences learn in the course of a life review or other aspects of their experience, and we can grow from these lessons, and we can apply these lessons into our daily life.
I'll find it in a moment. There we are. So, as he says, it's for us as well. We don't have to have a near-death experience to benefit from it. In fact, he says it's like a benign virus. All his students would caught this benign virus. So once you read about it, you begin to change yourself, because you read and you read more, and you understand. I mean, this is why it matters, because Sean's experience with that being of light, the more you read, the more you realise this unconditional love, which is right there for us. Okay, the barrier, the veil between this world and the next is so thin. Knowing that it's there, knowing that you have that love for you, which you do, gives you confidence. But you need to keep reading about these to keep a boost to it. But why does it matter? So many people suffer extreme grief. Okay? It's of course, grieving is a natural process, and everybody's individual. But but does it really need to be as extreme as it is? Now, okay, I was raised to be fairly independent, but I didn't grieve for my mum, and we were on the best of terms. There wasn't a nicer person than my mother. She devoted her life to medicine, but I didn't need to grieve for her because I knew she was going to a better place, and I really didn't. Quite different from my wife, but that was because we didn't talk. And this is one of the whole things. We need to talk about death, the whole dying process. When somebody is beginning to going through that process, if this is explained to them, then they know they're going to a great place, and so do the children. And they can talk about it, and they can resolve any unresolved issues and say those things that they want to say. A lot of cases, people say, I wish I had 5 more minutes with so-and-so. But you don't need that if you've talked about it. It took me 20 years to resolve the problems I had relating to my wife. It wasn't to do with her loss of physical presence, although that was bad enough. It was the unresolved things. And that was resolved. Well, lucid dreams and a medium or two. I've got to tell you this. I'm beginning to run out of time, but it was a fledgling medium that gave me one of the best messages I've had. She didn't want to give me this reading, anyway, she just started describing my boat, my fireboat, it's a sailing dinghy, and how important this was to me. In really detailed, she told me about the inlay all around the side, and she's never seen it before, she didn't know that. Then she just started describing my wife, very bubbly character, and then she said, I've got this teddy bear. This is ridiculous, but I've got to give it to you. I've got to give you what I've got. She's saying she's in the teddy bear, and I kept quiet because I wanted to know what else she had to say. What I found nice, the fact she got confused. That teddy bear was my late wife's 90 case, and I put her ashes in it. So mediums do get it right. And it's wonderful when they give just what they've got. But it's way more important, more than just about dealing with grief. Christine Stewart, my belief is that if everyone had an NDE, there would never be another war. No one would starve and no one would be the victim of violence, and greed would become a thing of the past. If you've had a life review, you realise that unconditional love. Can we learn to love as unconditionally as we are loved? And you get that idea, how can you do harm to anybody? Daniel Brigley, he's had several NDEs, poor chap. But human beings are powerful spiritual beings, meant to create good on the earth. This good isn't usually accomplished in bold actions, but in singular acts of kindness between people. It's the little things that count, because they are more spontaneous and show who you truly are. They are the manifestations of the love within you, so it's the small things that really matter. I was going to show you Maggie Doyne. I did in the previous talk. Simply because it's actually totally unrelated from near-death experiences, but did it so that people could feel the emotion. Because I don't know how many people get emotional when they hear about something really loving being done. Now this lady, young girl, she went as a student to Nepal, and her eyes met this tiny Nepalese girl who was carrying a bag of stones, and she watched it. She was carrying these stones backwards and forwards. This was to earn money for her family. Maggie Doyne basically contacted her parents to get her life savings, which was something like $10,000, which she saved from babysitting all her life. She bought this plot of land. She now has a school for, she started with one, which is now 200 of these Nepalese children that she educates, because they weren't having an education. But the point is if you get emotional over something like that, which I think most of you would, what it is, you're remembering that unconditional love that's the other side. It's a memory that's being evoked in you, and that's why I played that. But instead, I'm just going to play this Tony Woody one. This is the guy that jumped out of his skin. And if you watch the whole thing, he does get very emotional in the whole thing, but this is just a snippet. Because I can't really put it better.
Everything else in my life that's occurred since then, that's the foundation. There's before the light and there's after the light. Big difference in my belief system. And so I went deep after that. I started learning about all religions, and everything I learned, I was always based on my foundation, or my baseline was what I experienced in the light. That was the truth, and I knew it, and nobody could tell me otherwise because I was there. And so all these other religions had a lot of spiritual principles that applied with what I felt and saw and experienced on the other side, but they also had man-made agendas in them. And that's when I said, I'm not doing that anymore. And I kind of just went into a spiritual perspective of a God of my own understanding. And I'm like, if I'm going to go find a God of my own understanding, I need to learn, how did God do all this? How can I be here physically? How does all this exist? So here goes my engineer mind again. And I learned everything I could about the nature of the universe, which led me to studying the nature of consciousness. But I learned everything from subatomic particles and how they turn into atoms and then molecules, and the nature of the Big Bang, and how galaxies were formed, and solar systems, and supermassive, everything, quasars, magnetars, gamma ray burst, how that, all of that, supermassive black holes. Nobody, no scientist anywhere can tell you how or where subatomic particles, how they pop in and out of existence, or what happens when you cross the event horizon of a black hole. Nobody can tell you that. And only 4% of the universe can we actually detect. The other 96% is dark energy, dark matter. They don't even really know what that is. So there's a lot we don't know. So I learned all that, and then I studied quantum electric dynamics, quantum physics. Learned about quantum entanglement. I studied the properties of light. And when I studied the properties of light, I learned about the double slit experiment, where they put a piece of paper up with 2 vertical slits in it, and they had a photosensitive material behind that, and they fired 1 proton of light at a time at it while they were watching it. And they got what they expected. They got 2 slits, 2 vertical lines on that photosensitive material behind it. So they said, okay, let's do this again, but nobody watched. They all left. They expected to have the 2 vertical lines on the photosensitive material, but they did not get that. They got a wave function. That means that 2 things. Light is both a particle and energy wave at the same time, and it's affected by consciousness. And I was in the light. It was all light. Everything's made with light. That's why it all radiates. That's when I understood that consciousness affects light, and everything is light, and our consciousness has a direct impact on our universe. And so, and so prayer is powerful. I tell people that now. But what I've come to understand is conscious prayer, everybody knows and understands what its purpose is, right? What I now understand is all thought is prayer, and it affects the entire universe because of quantum entanglement. And so be careful what you pray for all day long. So I'm learning these things, and now I'm coming to the point of understanding why love and positive thoughts and all of that is so important. And as I've changed my way of thinking, I've literally changed my body and restoring my health, doing it that way, and just being kind and loving as I can. And all that stuff was really cool and neat to learn, but it really was a waste of time, because all we have to do is just love God with all our heart, and the way we do that is love each other unconditionally, because God is in every one of us. So when I'm loving you, I'm loving God. So if I'm not loving you, I'm not loving God. And so love God with all our heart, love each other like that, learn how to love unconditionally, and take care of this planet. If we all did that, we'd have heaven on earth right now.
So I hope you understand why I wanted to put on this talk, because there's the evidence, and this planet needs our thoughts very soon, right now. Thank you.